Thanks for staying with us on the conversation. On our next topic, in a dramatic power grab in July last year, Tunisia's President Kais Saied has been accused of leading an autocratic government. In opposition to this, thousands of Tunisians demonstrated on Saturday in the capital Tunis, demanding President Saied's removal after a coup. The march was organized by the National Salvation Front, a coalition of opposition parties, including the Islamist-inspired Ennahdha that had dominated Tunisian Parliament before its dissolution by Saied. The National Salvation Front has announced it will boycott a December vote to elect a new parliament with limited powers. Opponents of Tunisian President Kais Saied accuse him of staging a coup by dissolving the country's parliament last year and assuming executive power. On July 25, 2021, the Tunisian President Kais Saied dismissed the government and suspended the Tunisian Parliament. This was followed by the publication of Presidential Decree number 117, which suspended much of Tunisia's 2014 constitution. And joining us right now on the conversation, we have Abdulatif Ahmed, who is the head of research and monitoring desk at News Central TV. Thank you so much for joining us, Abdulatif.
Thank you for having me.
So we saw a series of these protests happening on Saturday. I wonder, can you tell us more about the reason for this recent protest?
The Tunisian protests came about as a result of general disenchantment with the Kais Saied government. You'll remember that in July there was, the dismissal of the prime minister, the dissolution of government, the parliament, as it were, and general disenchantment. And then by August, during a protest, a young man was incurred an injury, and from that injury, he died some weeks later. That inspired, a lot of anger across the country, and the opposition parties decided to stage one of the biggest protests in the history of Tunisia. And this protest is primarily provoked by the rising cost of living, the cost of fuel, the cost of food, and the economic turmoil in the country. That necessitated, the kind of reaction and response as we saw, over the weekend.
Okay, Abdulatif, there are basic reasons why this protest is going on. Now, there are oppositions like the Islamic-based Ennahdha party, then the National Salvation Front. We also have this Historian party. So who were the major masterminds of this protest, or was it just a joint protest, or each opposition had theirs separately?
So opposition groups that ordinarily have opposing views on politics and governance are united in their perception of Kais Saied, because it is almost unanimous that Kais Saied is authoritarian. He is, trying to foist himself and remain in power, consolidate on power, and remain, in governance. However, the parties, including Islamist Ennahdha Party and the Free Constitutional Party and the Historian Party, and amongst others, are unanimous about the need to protest the high-handedness of President Kais Saied. And that is why they called on their members from across the country and decided to stage one of the biggest protests in the history of the country.
Now, over time, Saied has resolved himself and said that the reason why he has done all this was to correct economic troubles he had inherited from Tunisia's post-Ben Ali leadership. How far has he gone? Do you think he has been able to curb this supposed corruption that he said he's trying to solve?
Well, except for, the theatrics that he has been, displaying over time, what is clear is that the country has continued to worsen in terms of its micro and macro economics, and then its politics. You cannot govern if people do not believe in you. Whatever it is you have put in place for the betterment of the people cannot be received or interpreted, in the right way. And therefore, it has continued to impact on, the country. Last year, the country requested for about $4 billion from the IMF. It was not approved, but 2 days ago, 1.9 billion was approved by the IMF, sorry. Again, it is because the economic indices have continued to show negative signs. The country is unable to move beyond the post-Zain al-Abidine era, that inspired a lot of hope that after the protest, people, or the revolution, as people said, they'll begin to heave a sigh of relief. So far, there's not much to count on economically, and that is primarily why people have continued to protest, people have continued to be disenchanted, people have continued to show, revulsion for the policies of President Kais Saied.
Okay, let's take it back to this revolution that happened in 2011. I mean, it brought about this Arab Spring uprisings and even Tunisia's democracy. Now, according to some of the slogans that we won the end of a regime. What do you see happening in the coming days? Are we likely to see more of a revolution happening, or is it just going to be mere protests continuing?
Don't forget that in 2011, when the protests, took a peak, someone had died, having, immolated himself, and then there's general disenchantment across the country. Again, in August, someone died because of police trying to stop protesters. Some of these signs will be like a pattern, and we do not know what next steps the president will be taking. When you consider, for instance, that the president is a constitutional lawyer, you'll assume that he'll be able to protect the constitution and ensure that he does things based on constitutional provisions. But he has gone outside the constitutional provisions, and what it entails is that when you sack the judiciary, you sack the parliament, you've sacked the prime minister and all other organs of governance that can allow for devolution of power and allow for better governance. What it means is that you've become totalitarian, and it could descend from bad to worse.
Mm. And looking at bad to worse, I mean, just like you rightly said, Kais Saied is a constitutional lawyer, and we've seen different unions protesting. We've seen the UGTT, which was a labor union that was in support. We saw judges also protesting. I mean, is Saied really in isolation, and do you feel he would be moved by all this protests going on?
So far, he has not shown sign of being worried about all the calls and cries, because the signs of a totalitarian leader are clear. His intentions are clear. It doesn't seem that he really wants democracy to run in the country, and that is why he needed to tweak the constitution to suit his intentions, and he became repressive against journalists. He became repressive against free speech. He became, again, anti-opposition in the sense that he does not welcome alternative views. All of these are essentially ingredients for, worsening the, political and economic condition of that country.
Now, over time, the African Union, even in our previous topic, has been accused of just laying back. Now, we've seen most governments having this tweaking of the constitution to favor them. I mean, what role do regional bodies have over a president tweaking the constitution? What exactly, or where did their powers stop?
Yeah, so there has been, minimal engagement from the African Union and other regional bodies, to see how the president can toe the line, of probity and accountability. So far, countries would rather steer clear from, creating a crisis that would affect the region. Don't forget that the crisis that hit the northern African region started from Tunisia, and most of the regional, the bloc in Northern Africa is being mindful to not trigger what will resort into a repeat of of the Tunisian experience in their own country. So some diplomacy and not wanting to roughen the waters. I think that is what is playing out in that region and between the African Union and Tunisia.
All right, thank you so much, Abdulateef Ahmed. We wait to see what happens with this protest, because they've been going on and on in Tunisia. Thank you so much for unwrapping all this in the conversation.
It is my pleasure.
And this is where I'll draw the curtains in today's edition of The Conversation. Earlier, we dealt on situations in Ethiopia and the Tigray region, where we had guests who lamented the onslaught going on in the Tigray region, women being killed and raped, men being slaughtered, and the lack of the African Union to do what is right to forestall all these occurrences. And we do hope that all grievances are resolved and peace is brought back to the Ethiopian region. I am Rita Omodia. Do join me again on Wednesday for another edition of The Conversation.